Hey everyone, Theme Park DNA. Today I'm going to be attempting to install my Saberforge Talon empty that I bought before with the Saberforge DIY Build Kit. So earlier I did an unboxing on that, and I'll put a link in the description below. So this is my first install. I do not profess to be an expert. But I figure, well, if I can figure this out, then so can you. So I've been watching a lot of videos and doing some research. I read my Golden Harvest V3 manual, and I've been watching some videos by Rob Petkow, formerly of the Custom Saber Shop, now with Genesis Custom Sabers. And man, is he really putting out some phenomenal work. If you haven't checked him out before, go check him out. He is an expert. I profess no expertise at all. I'm gonna muddle my way through this, and we'll see how it goes. So this being a thin neck saber, I might not be able to install this like I normally would. I don't really have access through the top, so because the thin neck on here is permanently attached, there's not a way to remove it. So I'm gonna have to do all my installation from the bottom. I'm gonna have my wiring probably a little bit longer than I would on a different type of installation. So let's get started. If you watched my DIY build kit unboxing, then you'll already know that this is a purple LED from Saberforge. This already comes with the copper heat sink and the LED module. The optic and everything is already pre-installed by Saberforge. It is pre-wired. The positive and negative is already wired, and it already has the proper resistor already installed. So at $109, this is a great way to go, especially for beginners, because that's one less thing I got to worry about. I don't have to calculate my resistor for my LED, and you don't have to do any of the wiring on the LED itself. It comes just like this. The only thing I did is I warmed up my wires with a heat gun and gave them a little bit of a twist, so that because especially since I'm dealing with such long wires here, because I'm working from the bottom, when I shove everything in there, then it should hopefully coil up and be a little better on my cord management, my wire management. So I'm going to start off by going ahead and putting this thing in. Now, right here on the inside of this saber, right here where this mid section here, this switch and grip section, it's got these great horizontal pieces to it, kind of a little reminiscent of Obi-Wan and Luke's top of their saber. The interior diameter of this thins just a little bit, because as you can tell, the outside diameter changes at the groove section. And so just on the inside of here, the interior diameter chokes down just maybe a 1/16 of an inch. So as I drop this in, you'll hear it kind of hits a stopping point, but it still will fit. I just need to work it through. Now it doesn't matter really the orientation of this, except for, as I just said, my wires are on one side and my switch is going to drop in. Well, I already had that clamped up, ready to solder. My switch is going to sit right here, and I really don't want that getting in the way of my wires. So I'm going to try to take the wires here and give it a twist and rotate my LED until I can see. You might not can see inside that hole as well as I can, but I'm just going to give it a little bit of twist to get the wires away from my switch. I'm going to drop that down, and I'll just give it a little push to make sure it's all the way here. And then on right here, if you see this screw right here, this is the LED retention screw. I'm going to give that a tighten, and that will hold my LED in place. Alright, I'm just using a ratcheting wood clamp for this, and it's got little grooves inside there. It holds the switch really well, and I'm going to try to put my post kind of up and down so that when I solder on this, when I'm done with one post, I can just flip it over and have access to the other post. Alright, I'm going to start off by wiring my switch. I already have this in my clamp, and I'm going to use black wire because my wiring diagram on my Golden Harvest V3 manual says use black, so just to make it easier on myself, I'm going to try to keep the colors the same as I can, although the bundle of wires that I got from Saberforge did not include an orange wire, and you'll see what I need that for in a little bit. So what I'm doing here is I'm just giving the end of the wire here a little twist. There's many strands of metal on the inside here, and so I'm just giving them a twist so that when I pre-tin it, when I add a little solder to it, it'll just be one solid piece. So I've got, if you'll notice, I've got some helping hands here. These are a little bit different. This is one of the 6-armed ones, and I gotta say, the inexpensive one from Harbor Freight does a better job. I really do prefer these helping hands in most jobs, but I've noticed that I like to pre-tin my wires a lot with these because it's rubber coated here and it's a little easier on the insulation on the wire. Alright, I've got some heat shrink here. I'm cutting off a little more than I usually would. I think this heat shrink has like a 2-to-1 shrink ratio. The reason I want it to be a little bit longer is I want to make sure that it goes over the post really well. So, like I said, I've got a little more on here than I need. Maybe as I get a little more experience, that'll come naturally. But as it is right now, I'm going to err on the side of caution. In case I am not able to edit all of that loud noise out, if you hear it, it's because I have a fan when I solder. It's probably over paranoia, but I figure lead smoke in your lungs is probably not a good idea. I've got my heat gun here. Take a look at my solder joint. I think it'll work. Use a little bit less heat shrink this time. And I think I'm going to use it on my lower setting and not be so impatient. Remember at the beginning of the video when I said I wasn't an expert? Right? Just want to reiterate that. So if you'll notice, I've changed my working area here. So I held the heat gun. I was just shrinking up this little bit of shrink wrap on my switch, on the second half of my switch, and it looks like it's a good joint, and the shrink wrap's doing its job, not only to protect that joint from coming in contact with metal and shorting out, but also it gives a little bit of protection against pulling the wire too hard, maybe like stress relief. So I had it on the lower setting, and I suppose I got a little too confident in that lower setting, and the wire's just fine. I don't know if this is right or not. I'm sure a lot of you have more experience with this than I do, but I figure with the end of my insulation of my wiring starts to get a little glossy that I need to stop with the heat gun. So I was paying such close attention to the heat shrink here that I wasn't looking at my background, my cutting protection, the cutting board, well, not cutting board, the cutting mat that I had underneath this was starting to slightly warp. So I thought it was time to break out the silicone, which I probably should have had all along. I just really like those measurements on the cutting mat. I think I'm gonna have to get one of the more expensive cutting mats that are a little more heat resistant. So we'll continue with the silicone. I kind of like the silicone anyway, and it does have measurements here, but I think for the most part I'm just gonna eyeball it. Alright, well, I've got these long needle nose pliers here. We're going to attempt to actually use the nut that came with the anti-vandal switch instead of gluing it in place. So I'm just gonna slide this in place. I'm gonna put my switch here in this top hole. And I'm actually gonna thread the wires through that nut and push them down to the bottom. Alright, so I used my pliers to hold the nut in place inside the hilt here, and I used the switch to turn counterclockwise to try to thread it on there. And I got it threaded on there at the bottom, but because of how much space the switch takes up inside the hilt, and because of the wires and the heatsink, and I used just a little bit too much on one post, if you'll notice, I found it was easier just to use a screwdriver in this bottom hole, this second hole, and just use it to turn the nut clockwise. So I've done that until I pretty much can't do that anymore. Without this thin neck here, and I can reach down from the top and be able to do this, that would make this a whole lot easier. So the thin neck does complicate things as far as this washer goes. Not impossible, just takes a little bit of patience. The hole is actually keeping me from getting shallow enough. Alright, so I believe I got this thing in here. Alright, just to catch you up on what I did, I used these long needle nose pliers to thread the nut onto the bottom of the switch. And then, using a little bit of light through this end, I just took the end of this screwdriver and just turned it counterclockwise until I couldn't do it anymore. Then I took these pliers again, and as soon as I got it about as tight as I could with the screwdriver, I put the end of this screwdriver down through the hilt and found the flat side of the washer, and I pushed on the corner, and I was able to tighten it just a little bit more and rotated it around to the next side. Then I found the next flat side and I pushed on that right hand side as hard as I could manage without feeling like I was going to damage anything. And I think that I've got the switch in there. My first successful switch installation. Alright, so I'm done with the switch. I pre-tinned a couple of wires. So I'm looking at my diagrams, my wiring diagrams, and I'm getting ready to do the seedling, which is a circuit board that helps regulate charging, and it drops in right here in the second switch hole. And instead of the normal power cable, it has the USB mini B charging plug. It came with a braided cord, which I thought was cool. So these 4 pads are going to get wired up and go to the battery, positive and negative, and these 2 go to 2 spots on the Golden Harvest V3 board. The diagram calls for a green wire and an orange wire, and I don't have an orange wire. I'll just have to use another color. Alright, I'm going to pre-tin my board, and so by looking at my diagrams, I know that I'm going to need these 4 pads in sequence here. It's going to be battery positive, battery negative, and the 2 speakers. So I'm going to go ahead and try to pre-tin those. Next, these 3 pads are going to be for the negative for the LED, and I think I'm going to have to bridge them, so I'm going to put a little more solder on these 3, and then I need these 2 here for the switch, for the AV switch. Alright, looks like I've got everything on my board pre-tinned. I'm going to let that board cool off before I do any more soldering on it. Alright, well, I've got my seedling wired up, positive and negative that goes to the battery, and I've got these data lines, green and white. The white, I'm substituting the orange wire for white. Alright, so I've got my seedling inserted into the hole. I twisted up my line to keep it separated, and there's really no way to put this in other than glue. There's no threads or anything else.